Every day, roughly a fifth of the world's oil has passed through a channel of water barely 21 nautical miles wide at its narrowest point, funneled further still into shipping lanes only a few miles across as it threads between Iran and the tip of Oman's Musandam Peninsula. This is the Strait of Hormuz, the passage between the Persian Gulf and the open ocean, and for most of modern history, it has carried an almost unimaginable volume of the planet's energy trade in near silence. That silence broke in 2026. Since February, when the United States and Israel launched a war against Iran that included the killing of its supreme leader, this strait has become something closer to a battlefield than a shipping lane. Iran declared the passage closed to foreign vessels, laid sea mines, and fired on merchant ships. The United States answered with a naval blockade and airstrikes on Iranian naval targets. A fragile ceasefire gave way to renewed attacks by summer, and shipping volumes through these waters have collapsed by nearly the whole of what they once were. Analysts speak of the strait as a choke point, a phrase that reduces an entire sea to a switch that could be flipped, and in 2026, for the first time in decades, that switch was actually thrown. But to look closer at the Strait of Hormuz even now is to see something the maps and the market reports leave out entirely. Beneath the naval patrols and the mine clearance operations, there are villages built from coral stone and painted the color of the sea. There are fishermen who read the tide the way other people read the news, who have kept working these waters through blockades their grandparents' generation could not have imagined. There are islands where children walk to school past dhows being built by hand, using techniques passed down since before oil was ever found beneath this water, and where families now listen for the sound of jets as closely as they once listened for the weather. This is Hormuz, and this is Keshem, and this is the string of settlements along Iran's Hormozgan coast, where the strait is not a choke point or a battlefield alone. It is home. This is a story of the people who live there. Through a war, the rest of the world is only watching from a distance. The day begins here before the sun does. In the fishing villages that line Hormuz Island and its larger neighbor Keshem, men are often on the water by 4 or 5 in the morning, while the air is still cool enough to work in, and the fish are still moving close to the surface. The call to prayer drifts out from a village mosque, layered over the sound of outboard motors coughing to life and wooden hulls knocking gently against a jetty. The smell here is distinctive and immediate: salt, diesel, and the mineral tang of red ochre dust that coats much of Hormuz Island's ground, a soil so richly colored it is harvested and sold as a natural pigment and even used to season food. As the sky lightens from indigo to a pale bleached white, the heat begins its long ascent, and the rhythm of the day bends entirely around it. By late morning, boats are returning, nets full of kingfish, tuna, and shrimp, and the catch is sorted on the beach with quick, practiced hands before it moves to market stalls or straight into a neighbor's kitchen. The middle of the day belongs to the heat, when even in winter the Gulf sun presses down hard and life slows into the shade of wind towers and covered walkways until the worst of it passes. Afternoons soften into something communal. Women gather in courtyards to mend nets, weave palm leaf baskets, or work the intricate gold thread embroidery that decorates traditional garments across Hormozgan's coastal towns. Tea is poured constantly, dark and sweetened, often flavored with cardamom, and a visitor rarely leaves a doorway without being pulled in for a cup. Children move through this stretch of the day differently depending on the season. During the school year, they filter home in small groups along dirt lanes bordered by low coral stone walls. And in the hottest months, they disappear indoors until the heat loosens its grip, re-emerging near dusk to play in alleys that cool quickly once the sun drops behind the hills. As evening approaches, the light over the strait turns a shade of copper that photographers travel a long way to see, and boats not out fishing that night settle into their moorings while families walk down to the water simply to feel the temperature drop. Vendors near the jetties lay out the day's smaller catch on woven mats, calling out prices to neighbors rather than strangers, since most of what is sold at this hour never leaves the village at all. Night here is quiet in a way that feels almost engineered, a hush interrupted only by the distant hum of a tanker's engine, far out past the shallows. Moving through water the fishermen have known intimately for generations, on a course set for a refinery none of them will ever see. Family is the architecture of daily life on both Hormuz and Keshem, and households tend to be large, multi-generational, and tightly bound. It is common for grandparents, parents, and children to share a single compound or a cluster of adjoining homes, with grandmothers often taking a central role in raising young children while parents work the boats or tend small plots of land. Hospitality is not a suggestion here, but something closer to an obligation. A stranger who lingers near a village is likely to be invited in for food, and refusing that invitation would be considered stranger than accepting it. This custom, deeply rooted across Hormozgan's Bandari communities, reflects a broader ethic of collective care. Fishing catches are frequently shared beyond the immediate family. Boat repairs become neighborhood efforts, and celebrations, whether a wedding or the start of the fishing season, draw in the entire village rather than a guest list. Blessing ceremonies asking for calm waters and safe returns are still observed in many coastal communities before the fishing season begins, a ritual that binds economic survival to shared spiritual practice. Marriages, too, tend to remain a communal affair rather than a private one. A wedding in a village on Hormuz or Keshem can draw in dozens of extended relatives and neighbors, with music, shared cooking, and days of preparation that pull the whole street into a single rhythm. Elders occupy a position of genuine authority within this structure, not simply as figures of respect, but as active decision-makers in family and even community matters, consulted before major choices about land, marriage, or a young person's move to the mainland. In this way, the social fabric of the coast functions almost like a second economy, one measured not in currency, but in obligation, memory, and reciprocity, quietly reinforcing everything the visible economy depends on to keep functioning. The cultural identity of this coastline is the product of centuries of ships passing through it, not despite the strait, but because of it. The people here are ethnically layered. Persians form the majority in many towns, alongside Arab communities concentrated along the coast, who trace their presence back generations through maritime trade, and indigenous Hormuzis, who speak a distinct dialect blended from Persian, Bandari, and Minabi influences, threaded through with Portuguese, Arabic, Hindi, and even Dutch and English loanwords, remnants of the merchants and colonial powers who once fought over control of this passage. Islam shapes daily and spiritual life throughout the region, with both Sunni and Shia communities present across different towns and islands. Traditional dress remains visible and functional rather than ceremonial. Women in many villages wear the borghe, a distinctive mask traditionally used for sun protection and modesty, and still worn by older generations, paired with vividly embroidered trousers and patterned headscarves in reds, golds, and deep blues. Architecture responds directly to the climate, with badgirs or wind towers rising above coral stone houses on Hormuz to funnel breezes down into living spaces long before electric cooling existed. Music carries traces of African rhythms brought across the Gulf through historic trade and migration, blended into local Bandari folk styles played on drums and the ney, a reed flute common across Persian musical tradition, with call and response singing that often accompanies communal work like net mending or boat building. This layered heritage is not an abstraction. It is written into surnames, into the cadence of local speech, into recipes, and into the very geography of who settled where along this coast, a living record of a strait that has never in its history belonged to a single people or a single power. Economically, this is a region defined by two entirely different scales operating side by side. On one level is the ancient, small, and intensely local, fishermen working from wooden boats their families may have built themselves, farmers coaxing dates and limited crops from arid soil, women weaving baskets from date palm leaves, and artisans shaping pottery from the island's mineral-rich clay. On another level, barely visible from the villages themselves but shaping everything about the region's importance, is one of the largest flows of energy commerce on Earth. The strait is the only sea passage out of the Persian Gulf, meaning that a significant share of the world's seaborne crude oil exports, along with much of the world's liquefied natural gas, must funnel through this same channel the fishermen cross every morning. Bandar Abbas, the region's major mainland port city, functions as a critical node for Iran's trade and naval presence, while enormous tankers glide past artisanal fishing boats in a juxtaposition that captures the entire duality of this place: subsistence economy and global energy infrastructure, sharing the same 18 or so nautical miles of water at the strait's narrowest crossing. Tourism has slowly grown into a third economic thread, particularly on Hormuz and Keshem, where visitors come for the striking geology and the coastal culture rather than the industry offshore. Guest houses, small tour operations, and handicraft sales now supplement fishing income for a portion of island families, even as the larger machinery of the global oil trade continues almost entirely out of sight. Public sector jobs tied to schools, clinics, ports, and local administration round out the local economy, offering a measure of stability that the more seasonal work of fishing and tourism cannot always provide. Food here tells the story of the sea and the trade routes both. Seafood dominates the table, prepared simply but with bold, specific flavors: grilled kingfish, called shir mahi locally, shrimp cooked in tamarind-based sauces, and stews thickened with dried lime, known as limu amani, a flavor that defines much of southern Iranian cuisine. Galya mahi, a spiced fish stew built on tamarind, garlic, and turmeric, appears regularly on family tables, alongside flatbreads baked fresh each morning. On Hormuz Island specifically, the striking red soil itself is used as a seasoning and coloring agent in some dishes, a detail that ties the physical landscape directly to what ends up on the plate. Dates, a staple crop across the wider Gulf region, appear at nearly every meal and every gathering, whether eaten plain, stuffed, or incorporated into sweets served to guests as an immediate gesture of welcome. Meals are eaten communally, often seated on the floor around a shared cloth, and offering food to a visitor is understood as one of the clearest expressions of respect a household can give. Bread is baked fresh daily in many households, often in simple clay ovens, and the smell of it drifting through a village lane in the early morning is, for many who grew up here, as evocative of home as the sound of the sea itself. Spices arrived here the way people did, by ship, and the local kitchen still reflects that history. Turmeric, cumin, and dried lime sit alongside chilies and coriander in combinations that trace a direct culinary line back to centuries of trade with India, East Africa, and the Arabian Peninsula. The landscape itself is almost otherworldly in places, and it has shaped the character of the people who live within it as much as any tradition has. Hormuz Island is famous for its so-called Rainbow Valley, where mineral deposits stain the ground in streaks of red, yellow, ochre, and even a rare, striking black, creating terrain that looks closer to another planet than to the Persian Gulf coastline. Keshem, the largest island in the strait and home to a UNESCO-recognized geopark, holds the Valley of Stars, a canyon of wind-carved rock towers that locals have long associated with folklore about falling meteors and spirits that move through the gullies at night. Keshem's coastline is also lined with some of the region's largest mangrove forests, a fragile ecosystem that supports fishing stocks and shields the coast from erosion. Beyond the islands, the terrain along Iran's Hormozgan coast is arid and unforgiving, backed by the folded, sun-bleached ridges of the Zagros foothills, with temperatures that regularly climb past 45 degrees Celsius in summer. This is not gentle land. It demands endurance, and the people who have stayed here for generations carry that endurance as a defining trait, an unspoken pride in simply having made a life in conditions that would exhaust most outsiders within days. The sea itself, meanwhile, offers a strange kind of mercy against that harshness. The same waters that carry supertankers also carry cooler air onto the islands at night, moderating temperatures just enough to make the coast more livable than the scorched interior of the mainland only a short distance away. A quiet reminder that even in a landscape defined by extremity, the Gulf gives back something in exchange for what it demands. Movement through this region reflects its contrasts just as sharply. On Hormuz Island itself, there is no real public transport system, and the tuk-tuk, a small three-wheeled rickshaw, remains the most common way to get around, alongside motorbikes and, for shorter distances, simply walking. Boats remain essential lifelines between islands, ferrying people, produce, and goods between Hormuz, Keshem, and the mainland port of Bandar Abbas, which serves as the primary hub connecting this coastline to the rest of Iran by road and by air. It is a striking image in itself. A woman crossing by wooden ferry to sell hand-woven baskets in a mainland market, moving through the same waters as some of the largest oil tankers on the planet, separated by scale but sharing a single, narrow sea lane. For the young people growing up along this coast, the pull toward larger cities is constant and increasingly difficult to resist. Bandar Abbas offers more schooling options and job opportunities than the smaller island villages can provide, and beyond it, cities like Shiraz and the capital, Tehran, draw students and workers seeking university education or careers outside fishing and tourism. Many families now send their children to the mainland for secondary school or university, creating a familiar tension felt in small maritime communities worldwide. The desire to preserve a traditional way of life set against the practical need for broader opportunity. Some return after their studies, drawn back by family obligation or a genuine attachment to island life. Many do not, and villages that once depended on large extended families now increasingly rely on grandparents and a shrinking core of residents to keep daily rhythms intact. Local schools on the smaller islands often teach only through the earlier grades, meaning that even before university becomes a question, many teenagers are already commuting or relocating to Bandar Abbas simply to continue their basic education, a logistical reality that quietly reshapes family life years before any career decision is made. For those who do leave permanently, the pull is rarely a rejection of home so much as a practical response to a shrinking set of opportunities in traditional fishing and craft work, professions that offer deep meaning but increasingly uncertain income. It is a tension familiar to small maritime communities across the world, but one felt with particular sharpness here, where the very water that built a way of life is also the reason a global economy now presses so closely against these shores, drawing young people toward larger cities and different futures. When night falls fully across the strait, the character of the place shifts again. The punishing daytime heat breaks, and villages that were nearly empty during the afternoon come back to life, families gathering outdoors on rooftops or in courtyards to catch what breeze moves off the water. Out at sea, the lights change entirely. Instead of the daytime traffic of small fishing boats, the dark is marked by the slow-moving constellations of tanker lights and the sharper beams of naval vessels, a nightly reminder of how much of the world's attention is fixed on these waters, even as the villages themselves fall quiet. Fishermen who work night shifts head out under starlight rather than sun, guided by generations of accumulated knowledge about currents and fish behavior that no chart can fully replace. It is in this contrast between the hush of a sleeping village and the ceaseless motion of global shipping just offshore that the strait's dual identity becomes most visible. Life here is not without real and mounting hardship. Summer heat in Hormozgan is among the most extreme anywhere on Earth, with humidity along the coast sometimes pushing the heat index to levels that pose genuine danger, particularly to the elderly and to outdoor laborers. Freshwater has historically been scarce on islands like Hormuz, requiring careful management and, at times, dependence on desalination or transport from the mainland. Fish stocks, the foundation of the local economy, face pressure from overfishing and environmental change across the wider Gulf, threatening a livelihood that has sustained these communities for centuries, and warming sea temperatures have begun to affect the timing and abundance of the very species these villages have depended on for generations. And there is the ever-present geopolitical weight of living beside one of the world's most contested waterways, a weight that in 2026 stopped being background noise and became the defining fact of daily life. Since the war between Iran, Israel, and the United States began in February, the strait has been a front line. Iranian forces have laid mines and fired on merchant ships. A naval blockade and airstrikes have targeted Iranian vessels along the coast, and shipping traffic that once numbered thousands of vessels a month has been reduced to a fraction of that. For the villages of Hormozgan, this has meant the near-total disappearance of tanker traffic once passing offshore, the arrival of foreign warships in waters once crossed mainly by fishing boats, and, for some communities, direct exposure to strikes and mine clearance operations along a coastline once defined by nothing more threatening than heat and tide. Sanctions on Iran, already a long-standing burden, have deepened alongside the war, shaping the cost of goods in ways fishing families feel directly. Fuel and equipment for boats can become harder or more expensive to obtain during periods of heightened tension, and the wider uncertainty surrounding the strait occasionally disrupts the small-scale tourism that many island families have come to rely on as a second income. None of these pressures are abstract to the people living here. They show up as a delayed boat repair, a thinner catch sold at a lower price, or a season when fewer visitors make the crossing from Bandar Abbas to see the Rainbow Valley or the Valley of Stars. Yet even amid these pressures, daily life continues with a resilience that outsiders often find striking, less a matter of denial than of long practice in adapting to forces far larger than any single village. And yet people stay. They stay because this coastline is not simply a place to live, but a place that has shaped, generation after generation, who they are. The rhythm of the tides is not background noise here. It is inheritance. A young man learns to read the color of the water the way his grandfather did on the same stretch of coast, often from the same wooden boat repaired one plank at a time rather than replaced. A grandmother's embroidery pattern is not decoration, but memory, a thread connecting her hands to her mother's and to a lineage of women who sat in the same courtyard shade, doing the same painstaking work. To leave for Bandar Abbas or Shiraz is not simply to seek opportunity. It is to step away from a specific, irreplaceable relationship with a landscape that offered almost nothing easily and demanded everything in return. And now, in 2026, staying has meant something heavier still. Living beside mined waters and naval blockades, watching fuel and food prices rise as the war between Iran, Israel, and the United States has strangled the shipping lanes their fathers once watched pass by from the shore. Even so, boats still go out at dawn. Nets are still mended in courtyard shade. What remains, for those who stay, is something the warships and the ceasefire negotiations will never capture. A hard-won sense of belonging to a place the rest of the world only sees as a line on a map or a flashpoint on a news ticker, a place where danger and beauty, ancient tradition, and global consequence share the same narrow, contested stretch of sea. The Strait of Hormuz will likely remain for years to come, a name spoken in newsrooms as shorthand for crisis. But for the people who wake there each morning to the sound of nets and outboard motors, war or no war, it is simply home, and it always has been. If stories like this resonate with you, there's a lot more of the world waiting to be explored in this series. We travel to some of the planet's most overlooked, most misunderstood, and most quietly extraordinary places. And we tell the stories of the people who actually live there, far from the headlines. If you enjoyed this journey to the Strait of Hormuz, consider subscribing so you don't miss where we go next. Give this video a like if it gave you a new way of seeing this part of the world, and drop a comment letting us know which place you'd like us to explore in an upcoming episode. We read every single one.